Graham Moore, thanks for coming on. You're the founder and chairman of the English Constitution Society. And when I reached out to you to invite you on, because a lot of people have recommended you, you're very, very highly requested. You said to me, I may not like what I hear, but it's all provable. So I'm looking forward to this. But let's go back to the origins of Graham Moore, who you are. And there was a near-death experience.
So when I was 24, I was in a coma. So I had something called chicken pox. I'd had it twice. I had 2 young kids and married, etc. And I got something called encephalitis. Encephalitis means your brain swells in your head. It's far worse than meningitis. Meningitis gives you a warning. Encephalitis doesn't. So it damaged my brain. I was in a coma for months, and I died during. Twice they did brain scans and said, he's got me, he's brain dead, etc. They come and asked for my organs. My dad told them the Foxtrot Oscar and said he's still breathing, leave him alone. There was various other things, but during that process, I crossed to the other side and I saw my mum, who died a year before, and she was crying and asking who I took to be God, to send me back, to let me go back. And there were 2 doors. And she was saying to me, my mum was saying to me, don't go through that door, go through that door, right? And I didn't know, I wasn't highly religious, but there were lots of people all over the world praying for me, right? In New Zealand, in America, funny enough, people I knew in Kent, and born-again Christians. And he appeared to listen, and basically said, go back through that door, which was the door that my mum had said go through. And when I went through that door, I come out of the coma. They told my family, if he comes out of the coma, he will never walk again, never talk again. He will be a complete vegetable. And I literally come out of it virtually with nothing wrong with me.
Wow. You would never ever have thought you'd have had a brain injury, because when I was doing my research on you and I'm watching you do your public speaking and your seminars, you was actually saying things so highbrow that it went over my head. And I'm thinking, cool, we're going to have to talk layman's when you come on the show, because it was kind of above my pay grade. And when it comes to the law, I'm no expert, which is why I'm going to find this interesting. So I want to know, how did you find law, or did law find you?
A bit of both, really. So one of the things to express to people was when I come out of the coma, one side of my brain was completely damaged. And what they said is my personality changed. Because I don't know if people know, but once one side goes down, the other side of the brain takes over. The human body is really clever, right? And it took a long time, at least 2 years to repair. But once it started to repairing, I had both sides of my brain working. And, for example, I'd never touched a computer in my life and taught myself to program in 3 weeks, right? Literally writing things. And then I was seeing different things. There were elements that were coming up in my life at that time, especially with banks. I hate banks with a passion. Not people who work in banks generally, but the banking system, right? And what they do, and the fact that they rob us day in, day out. And one of the things that they were doing at the time was they were lying to people, and this is over 30 years ago, in telling people that they were having ghost transactions with cash point machines. They called it ghost transactions because people were saying money has been taken out of my account. It wasn't me. The banks were then accusing the people, some of them elderly, some of them of taking their money out and trying to defraud the bank. Whereas the banks actually knew that their system was fallible. So a system was devised to show that, right? So we manufactured our own cash point machine from scratch, programmed it. I did all the communications of it, etc. And one of the things we did was then opened up our own bank, right? And it was in the Roman Road in East London. Most people went, what the? Mark, has gone in. And so the bank appears, a cash point machine appears in the window, looks identical to a Halifax bank machine, all programmed by me. And people come along, put their cash point card in it, put their PIN number in, saved it. We then downloaded the information. This is the crucial part that people don't understand. That information, not only did we draw money out of the account to protect account holders and to highlight what was going on with the banks, we sent all of the card details and the PIN numbers to the News of the World and said, there is your ghost withdrawals. And by the way, the banks know this is happening, right? And they're blaming the people. So we sent that all off. And then there was another issue, which I won't get majorly into. There was a second situation with the cash points, and it didn't involve, I might add, but what the press said and the media said was it involved a guy called Kenny Noy, right? So again, for this one, they said it was something like, I can't remember, 800 million that we was trying to defraud from the banks. Anyone who knows anything about cash and cash point machines will know it is absolutely impossible to take £800 million out of cash point machines. You'd need lorries to take it away. It is basically stupid, but that's what they presented. And what they actually did was they said that I had broken banking encryption on a 186 laptop, just working on it overnight, and I'd cracked it, right? So just to give you an indication, it would have took somewhere in the region of 400 years, even if you had the most sophisticated computers to crack 128-bit encryption, right? It was complete and utter lie, the whole thing. It was set up from start to finish. They also, the media and the courts and the police was all part of this, and the media and the police were saying, for example, that I had spent a night in a hotel with my best mate, Kenny Noy, with 8 prostitutes and doing Charlie, right? 1, I don't do Charlie, and 2, I'd certainly not be a performing seal in a room with 8 prostitutes with another geezer, right? It ain't a bit of me. Lucky enough, my wife knew me, right? And she said, that is complete and utter rubbish. But just to make sure your audience is aware, to this date, I have never met Kenny Noy, ever. And the media presented something that was completely fake, right? I ended up with a total, with both operations, of a 7-year prison sentence. The second was a complete setup from start to finish.
What was the charge? Fraud?
Yeah, conspiracy to defraud. It had been designed in such a way that they couldn't actually arrest you for fraud. Right. That caused them a big problem, right? Because at the time, the fraud laws were that you could not deceive a machine. You had to deceive a person, right? Well, if you're deceiving a machine, there's nothing they can arrest you for, which is one of the reasons why when we went, they took £10,000 of cash off us. Our solicitor went to court and barrister and said to the police, you've got £10,000 of their money. The judge was excellent. The judge just turned around to the police and said, can you prove that that come out of a cash point machine? And the police said, no. So the judge said, give it back to them then. And they made them carry it out and give it back to us. So they had to give us back that money. But the whole point of this is that everyone got their money back, right? Because the media had been given evidence that the banks was fallible in their security system. That's why they brought out chip and pin, right? Because it was the only way of defending against your card. So getting back, one of the things that happened was they made me a category A. I started off as a triple Cat A. Some of the people I met in Belmarsh, we was triple Cat A at first in Brixton, and then got transferred later on. But the major point is you've got triple Cat A and then double Cat A, right? So I met Charlie Bronson, for example, who come up to us, and me and my brother, and shook our hands and said, oh, I like you two boys, you're clever, I like that, right? He was a nice fella until he took the Heathrow hijackers. Do you remember them?
Yes.
The Iraqi hijackers?
Yeah, yeah.
I was there when he took them hostage, right? And the whole place went into lockdown.
Yeah, what was that like actually being there? What was the truth
Of what happened?
of Bronson kidnapping the hijackers?
No, he did. He did. He absolutely he trussed them up like chickens in his cell. I won't say too much because it gets too personal.
Towards who?
Well, let's just say there was some sexual abuse of trussed up people in his cell.
Right.
Right, that is the truth. But he was generally making demands because his window was out the window and facing mine, and he was shouting out the window that he wanted seven dark suits, 7 trilbies, machine guns, and a helicopter. And we were like, Charlie, behave yourself. Do you know what I mean? This ain't gonna do you any favours. But he's institutionalised. So every time he got within a couple of years of finishing his sentence, he'd either abuse a chaplain or he'd do something that extended his bird, right?
So he did sexually abuse people?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's probably more to this whole we're not going to free Charles Bronson thing.
Well, let me tell you something. Without any doubt whatsoever, he is one dangerous man. I mean, you're talking about someone who can do 250 press-ups with a 15-stone man sitting on his shoulders. Just as normal. He was on a 17-man unlock, right? 4 of them had to be gym screws. So I was on a 2-man unlock, right? He's on a 17-man unlock. In other words, there have to be 17 prison officers to open his door. That's how bad he was. But, I mean, a lot of things change over time with age, maybe various other reasons, I don't know, lower testosterone, whatever it is. He's probably calmed down a lot. But there are other things in the background with him.
Just to clear it up in my head, because a lot of people watching this, I mean, I've never, ever heard that Charlie Bronson could possibly be a sex case or sex offender ever. And there'll be a lot of fanatics, because a lot of people are fanatical about him. They've been writing back and forth for the last 30 years. Is there anything out there, is there any documentation that can prove?
In the prison records, it would be.
Okay.
I mean, I couldn't. So let me put it this way. I haven't personally witnessed that. But we know that with those hostages, want a better word, he took liberties with them.
Right, okay.
Right, so without any doubts in my mind, although they don't class him as mentally ill, otherwise he'd be in Broadmoor, I mean, I wouldn't class him as the full ticket.
Oh, blimey. And some of the things that he's done in there been suppressed to making its way to the general public outside of jail?
Yeah, most definitely. There's things that happen in prisons you'll never understand. I mean, that was part of what I used to do. So, for example, when I first got in there as a Category A, we was banged up 23 and a half hours a day. You was out your cell for 30 minutes. That was it, right? And then what I did was started to read the law. There was a particular book at the time that had just been written. It was called Prison Law by Simon Crichton, who was a solicitor that specialised in prison law, right? So, if you like, I specialise in the English Constitution. This solicitor was specialising in that type of law. And then when I started to read through the prison rules and the law and the Constitution and various other bits and pieces, I started to realise that what they was doing and our treatment during incarceration was completely unlawful. So we started to use the process of the prison, which was to put a request and complaint form in. So a lot of the guys, we'd be talking out the window, and they'd say, what do you want us to do, right? So the reason why the majority of Cat A's or Cat A's isn't because they're a danger to the public, it's because they're highly intelligent, right? That's the reason you're Cat A, 9 out of 10, or you're organised. You have assistants on the out that can help you. Most of them have got money. So to cut a long story short with that, what I did was I got out the window and I said, right, we need to be out on association. We need to be getting our jobs as cleaners, as on the servery and all these different things, right? Currently, it's not happening. They're just banging us up. So they went, why are we going to do that? Most of them was like, that's not going to happen. You ain't going to. This is Belmarsh, right? They used to call it Beirut, and I said every single one of you needs to go down at the desk in the morning, right? When I open this up, and they opened you up for breakfast, right? So you go and get breakfast, you go up and ask for a request and complaint form. And then I told them all what to write on it. Some of them you had to help with if they couldn't read and write properly, but you'd write it all out. And then there was, I think it was something like 27 requests and complaints went in. Next thing you know, the wing governors come on and said, "But what's the problem?" I said, "You know what the problem is? We're banged up, we want this and all that." Then there was a progression of that, and it ended up in the High Court. And the number one governor of Belmarsh got pulled into the High Court. And the number one governor was asked, so there was 2 prisoners, I believe, there that was bringing this thing to say that they weren't being treated correctly in Belmarsh. They was category A. They were the 2 guys that it was alleged that they planted a car bomb outside the Israeli embassy, right? Well, I spoke to both of them and knew them, sat in their cells with them, right? By the way, they didn't, right? That's a load of bollocks. And they got a lump of bird for it. Cut a long story short, they've gone up there, gone through the process. They've called the governor in. The governor said, no, they get full association, they work, they do this, they go out walking, they go to the gym. It was a complete and utter load of bollocks. It was a lie, right? But one of them then turned around to his barrister and said, and they let the governor go, right? So he's come out of the High Court, back in his car, driving him back to Belmarsh in South East London. And one of them said, "Ask for my book," right? Because as a cat, you're given a passport inside the prison. Every time they let you out of the cell, they write down a time, date, how long you've been in your cell, and it's all written in that passport. Wherever you go inside the prison, you have to be escorted with a dog, right? It's the highest security you can think of, right? So the barrister said to the judge, "Request the senior officer's book." He's got their book on him. It's called Being on a Book. So the judge said, "I want to see the book." So now the senior officer's had the passport of every day for weeks, right? What time you was let out of cell, what time you went back in your cell, every part of your movement is in that book. The judge looked at it and said, "This book says he's banged up 23 hours a day," right? That's not what that governor just said. So he then said, "Get on the phone, get that governor back in that witness box," right? So the governor's had to come all the way back to the High Court. Now the judge is sitting there with the book and said, "You just said this. The book from your officers and this prisoner says completely the opposite. What is it?" And the governor said, "I apologise," right? Now he could have got done for perjury. Right? The judge said, "I'm going to give you 24 hours or 48 hours to change this situation. And if you don't, I'm going to give them 2 men bail, because no one under my jurisdiction is going to be treated like that. They are remand prisoners. They haven't been found guilty of anything, right? So you either change the way you're treating them or I'll give them bail, right? Come back. Got to tell you something. We had everything. We had full association. We had work. We was working on the servers. We can clean it, right? So mentally, you start to feel a bit better, because Cat A then was all about crucifying you, interfering with your defence, which was common, right? So they wouldn't allow you proper access to your barristers, your solicitors, your family, right? Your family had to be signed off to come in and visit you. So the whole thing changed. And then I carried on reading the law, called for more and more law books from the law, because every prison's got a law library, right? So if you're defending yourself, you have the right to read the law in there, right?
Okay.
So I'm then pulling in law books, and then I was talking to certain individuals, which I won't go into major detail, and they'd say, this is what happened. And I'd say, well, this is the law. If your defence is this, you shouldn't get a conviction. And then people started to realise that their solicitors were just part of the process. Their barristers were just part of the process. You were being processed because the prison system is a business, right? And it's a socialist business, in effect, because it's part of the state. And the more they build it up and the more people they get through, it's a massive business. The same as barristers and lawyers and solicitors.
And did the knowledge of law immediately suck you in the second you got your teeth into it?
It did.
Some things become very addictive very quickly, like depending on what it could be any kind of information. You know, people are politically obsessed at the moment, for example.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I don't particularly like politics. The problem with politics is politics does you. So when people say I don't do politics, I always say to them, but politics does you. Right. So if you want to disengage, what you're doing is allowing the Marxists to take control, because that's the way they operate, right? So when I started to read...
That is so true.
The Archibalds, then I started to read about constitutional law. Believe it or not, I used to read I self-educated myself in prison. So I would read the Times, the Telegraph. Most people would call them the broadsheets. Sometimes I would sit there and have to get a dictionary out and say, what does that word mean? Do you know what I mean? And you'd be sitting there going, what's that? So I self-educated myself. And because we had so much time, what I did was use the time constructively. And there was other things that were happening in the prison, like you could see the abuse of prisoners. And on one occasion, we put a mass request for what's known as the Board of Governors. Next thing you know, the Board of Governors are just normal citizens, right, come in and said, what's the problem? Don't forget, right, you're talking about Category A, right? And they're saying the whole Cat A unit is complaining, right? So, and then the Board of Governors come in and say, tell us what you're doing. And you'd say, well, this is happening, that's happening, that's happening. And then the Board of Governors, the chair of the Board of Governors, would go and see the governor of the prison and say, all of the prisoners are saying this. So there is a problem, right? Did
you flip the roles in there, the dynamics? Obviously, if they're calling the shots and you don't know the law, you just obey blindly.
That is what happens. And again, which is one of the things that I explain to people at our seminars. I go all around the country now teaching the Constitution and teaching the real law to people, right? And that's what I said to people. You are being lied to, or the information is being withheld. The legal term for that is omitted, right? So if now they've changed the fraud laws, for example, and if you omit something, so if you know something to be true and you don't say it, you are technically committing fraud, right? Well, the government, the establishment, the universities, all of these people are omitting the English Constitution from people. They're not telling you, like the most obvious one, is people keep referring to Britain as a country. And I say it's not a country. It says that in the law books. It tells you it's a unitary state.
Yeah, let's get under the bonnet of the Constitution, because this is be like learning Japanese for me. So what is the Constitution?
So it's often said we don't have a written Constitution. That is a lie.
And what is a Constitution for those that don't know?
So the Constitution, basically, there are a set of laws and a structure to the way that we are governed. Right? So the structure of the Constitution basically tells you how the state can operate towards you and how the citizen operates to the state, right? It's a set of laws. It's a set of rules that society is governed by, all right? So our Constitution is common law, which comes from customary law. Customary law means if you had a custom in this area, I don't know, and I often mention you could every Thursday you've got a market day and you're allowed to shut the roads off to take the pigs to market. If that's gone on for 100 years or 200 years, and sometimes they say time immemorial, that becomes law. It doesn't have to be written, but that becomes the law because it is the local custom.
And how far back do these laws go? When were they first introduced? And why haven't I heard of them?
That's a good question. England is 1,100 years old next year as a single country and nation. This goes back to Athelstan, King Alfred. King Alfred was fantastic, for example, because when judges perjured their oath, he actually hanged 44 judges that caused us harm, right? And about another 200, it may be more, that he took all of their properties off them, took all their wealth and banished them from England, right? So there was always a way that if a judge went crooked, you can get justice, and it come from the king. So the Constitution, for example, and this is often misapplied, misquoted, etc., the establishment are telling everyone that Parliament is sovereign. It is not. It has never been sovereign. There is a separation of powers, and that separation of powers is shown in all these law books, right? All of our best judges understand, even if you go now to the Supreme Court, which shouldn't exist technically because our laws need to go back into the House of Parliament, these law books tell you the structure of the nation. So the separation of powers is there's three, but there's actually a fourth, right? That is Parliament, both houses, right? So the Commons, which we elect people, and then the House of Lords. Then you have the judiciary, which is a separate power, and it can strike down primary legislation, right? But everyone's often told that can't happen. That's because of the slow march through the institutions, the universities, and misinstructing barristers, solicitors, lawyers, and judges, right? If you actually go and read the law, it tells you that they can, right? And so you've got that. And the third, which is crucially important, is the monarch, right? So the monarchy is what's known as a legal fiction. The monarchy can never die, right? And then when you explain the truth of a legal fiction, in other words, not all this nonsense that comes out there from Freeman and the Landers, a legal fiction is true. It means it's basically a corporation or an entity that has been created by law. It is not natural in terms of mummy and daddy create a little baby. Baby is natural. You name the baby. That's in natural law. It's a natural person. But if you create, I don't know, the dozen, yeah, and you incorporate it as a company, you have created a separate legal entity, separate from you, right? And then that can trade and do whatever. But that's the same for the monarchy. The actual monarchy is a legal fiction, and it continues even when the monarchy. So when the king dies or the queen dies, the monarchy doesn't die. It's just you get a replacement person, right, that comes in that function. What's really important about the monarchy is they have a set of prerogatives that they should be applying for the people. So if Parliament was to make a law that was repugnant to the people, the monarch can veto it. To this day, they still have that power. They don't exercise it. That's why we've got problems with our constitution.
What does veto mean?
Veto means say no, sorry, not allowing it to become law.
They can override whatever they want.
Not whatever they want, within reason. If it is, so it must be repugnant. It must be something that's objectionable. I'll give you the greatest example of what they should have vetoed.
Yeah, because who decides its repugnancy?
Well, we do.
The people.
If you knew the Constitution, your constitutional rights and common law rights, if it was taught to you again, you are one of the most powerful people in the world because your state cannot go against that. We transferred our Constitution to the United States of America, for example. They took on the common law. They took our Constitution and they codified it. So we haven't got, only part of our Constitution is codified and written, right? It's not difficult. If at the seminars, I teach people what their rights are, and they're like, "I never knew that."
How do they enforce their rights? I mean, why do so many people get abused by the law, and why aren't they given the kind of advice that you would give people? So would a modern day barrister, for example, challenge your version of the law?
Definitely. Although,
so is your law any good to us?
Very much so.
We can still use it and apply it to a situation that we're in, for example.
So there's been a number of people who have launched appeals against convictions using me, right? As a Mackenzie friend. And I've set out the law and they've had their convictions quashed.
So the society supports people that are in trouble?
Yeah. Generally speaking, you would have to be a member, right? It's a bit like being a member of a union, right? You only support the people who are supporting you, but also that our members will go to demonstrations, do different things, and if something happens, like for example, there was something happened with Tommy Robinson, for example, last year or a year before, on St George's Day when he got released and it all went through. Well, I wrote out a full defence for him, right, and sent it to someone else who knew him. He published it and then took it down. But exactly what I had written, his barrister used in court and he walked away. What I'm saying is there are certain things that unless you know, it's a bit like, it's fairly obvious really, you don't know what you don't know. If the police are taking liberties with you and doing things that they shouldn't be doing, like everyone knows that a police officer shouldn't be able to walk up and headbutt you, right? It's obvious. They can't just do that, right? I've seen videos where they've done it. And then the person have said, I've now supplied that video to so-and-so, and now we're suing the police, right? And then you can get them done. You may have to privately prosecute. You've got to enforce, right, which is another thing that Rupert Lowe is about to do, you know, rape and torture gangs. I kept telling people, you need to use our law, right? And then people were saying to me, well, what's the law? And I said, well, the Criminal Justice Act 1988, Section 134, torture. Torture isn't about pulling your fingernails out. There is a whole set of reasons why you're being tortured, and rape and torture is one of them, right? Guess what? There's 4 key words in that law. One is called acquiescence, meaning you begrudgingly allowed it to happen. One of them is consent, and it can be any of these things. One of them is omission. So imagine all these people that knew about it and left it out of their report. That's called omission, right? And the other one is action. So if you think that some of these police officers were actually involved with it, right? It can be any of them things. So the Criminal Justice Act 1988, Section 134, torture, was brought into effect and enacted in English law on the 300th anniversary of the English Bill of Rights, right? Torture's always been unlawful in England since 1641, right? And by the way, it was only outlawed in Scotland in 1708, and they used to take Englishmen from England up to Scotland and let the Scots torture them, right? So there's lots of little things like that people, little quirky things of law. Getting back to it, it's an indictable offence only, right? It is reasonably easy to prove, right? We've already brought one case in this country. And if found guilty by jury, it is a whole life sentence, mandatory whole life sentence, no discretion of the judge, right? So there's so many of these people that have been involved with this that we can lock up for life. The only person who has started to push it forward and talk about prosecutions is Rupert Lowe. So there's lots of things. If you know how to do it, you can put it forward.
So you was at the Restore launch recently, weren't you?
I was there on the Friday for the launch at the Britannia Pier, and then I was also at the demonstration the next day. And
do you think Restore Britain is the answer?
I don't trust anyone. I've got to be honest with you.
You and me both.
Yeah, so the most important thing for me is I'm an Englishman, and I want England to take back England from these people, right? Who you know, I could go into detail who these people are, but I like Rupert Lowe. I like what he says. I like some of the people that he's got around him. He's the only one talking about mass deportations, which you have to do. Right? That's just common sense. And he's the only one who's come out, or his team is the only one who's come out with a plan for that. But often people say to me, is that constitutional? And I've said, yeah.
Because you say the Constitution is the solution, didn't you?
The Constitution is the solution. And one of the reasons I say that is all of this has happened before.
Right.
Right. So if you go back in history, which is what I do, and then you pull up the history of us being flooded with migrants, we'll show you how we dealt with it. And it tells you in law exactly how we dealt with it, right? So nothing is new under the sun, right? There are all these things. And by the way, the Acts of Settlement of 1701, which is a crucial part of our Constitution, which was an extension of the English Bill of Rights, furthering our rights, that had a section in there that said that you could not become an MP, a lord, or any position of authority or profit unless you was born of English parents, plural, right? And then that was taken out by the British Nationality Act 1948 at Schedule 4. So I say to people, we lost the Second World War. The people who won the Second World War was the Soviet Union. We was then infiltrated by communists in a big way, right? And it had gone on for a long time, but that was a culmination of it. 3 years after the Second World War, they take away this crucial, and when I say crucial, I mean crucial protection.
That's a bold statement to make, to say that we lost the Second World War.
100% we lost. I mean, get anyone to look around now. Look around at this country, and specifically England. Go into London and see that we are now 36% white.
So this would be a perfect example of you using the word acquiescence.
Yeah, because they've all acquiesced in allowing it to happen. There is a subversion. But just to get back to the Act of Settlement 1701, if you was to abolish the British Nationality Act of 1948, by the way, that's what makes you British. Not the fact that you've got a Scottish granddad and an Irish nanny, right? That's all bullshit. That's part of what they created in people's minds. What made British and created a British passport, right, was the British Nationality Act 1948. And Schedule 4 removed by stealth, they never told anyone, right, the protections. So if you was to abolish the British Nationality Act 1948 and the British Nationality Act of 1981, guess what had happened? Sadiq Khan is instantly removed as mayor. Any Mohammedan in this country, in any position of power, politics, local councillors, local mayors, anything like that, they're all gone because it's unconstitutional. You cannot have someone in that position and have authority over an Englishman, right, with that law standing as it is. And then you present that to a judge and the judges say, correct.
Was one of Rupert Lowe's policies to make sure that it was only going to be Christianity, for example, in Parliament? No Muslim MPs, for example.
Well, some people won't like what I'm about to say.
Yeah, say the things that you think people won't like. This would be interesting.
Right. So I say to people, there was always a problem with Catholics in this country, right? But not everyday Catholics. I was married to a Catholic for 33 years, never caused a problem, right? It's the Jesuits. So a Jesuit is the Society of Jesus, and they call the leader, who's a general of the Jesuits. He is known as the Black Pope. If
I'm not pushing back on things you're saying, it's because it's above my pay grade. I'm just right, interested in what you've got to say. So, in case the audience are thinking, why isn't Liam pushing back or challenging? Because I'm sure things that you say could be considered controversial.
It's not controversial.
To you.
They are a dangerous group of people. It is my personal opinion, only my personal opinion, they're far more dangerous than the Jews. Right? You get a lot of these people out there saying, it's the Jews, it's the Jews, it's the Jews, right? There is a Jewish mafia, right? And people have to be honest, right? There's no point in being dishonest. It's a bit like me saying, so if you think there's no Jewish mafia that are controlling all this and controlling the banks and controlling the media, etc., are you suggesting there's no American mafia? Are you suggesting there's no Russian mafia? And then when I say to people, if you was Russian and in Russia and you start highlighting the Russian mafia, you're going to get a bullet in your head. They're very real, right? Well, so are the Jewish mafia, and no one is allowed to talk about them. They are probably more powerful than anyone else on earth, right? The point I'm getting at is that I believe the Jesuits are even worse, right? And no one talks about them.
I've never even heard of them.
Right, so you're aware recently of a raid in Venezuela where the Americans, they didn't kidnap anyone, they executed a warrant for the arrest of Maduro, right? They went in there and he had 30 security team wrapped around him, right? Most of them were Jesuits. That's how dangerous they are. One of them was highlighted 3 days later and said, if you don't believe the Jesuits are dangerous, here he is protecting the Pope, right? So the Jesuits exist. In my law books, which I've got copies of there are paragraphs upon paragraphs upon paragraphs, all of it about Jesuits. Exile the Jesuits, get rid of the Jesuits, get them out of England, right? So everyone says, we banned the Jews, we did this. Yeah, we did. But there was another group of people that are just as dangerous. Them people caused the civil war in Switzerland in 1848, right? They was banished from Switzerland.
Where do these groups congregate? Where do they meet?
They're technically not a silent group. If you look at Care for Cali's website, or did, they've removed the Jesuit logo on it. There was a Jesuit logo, so Care for Cali, that was importing all these migrants. They did the same in America. The southern border of America, on the other side of the border, helping these people through, were Jews and Jesuits.
And how do they network amongst each other? Because normally if people are networking, you can sort of spot their network, be it online, Telegram.
You can go and research them. They're online. But people never talk about them, right? But they are highly dangerous people.
And what's their agenda?
You can look up the Jesuit oath, the real oath. You can pick it up from a university in Australia that holds a copy of it, right? They hate ordinary Catholics. They think you should be eliminated from the earth. They hate with a passion Protestants. I mean, with a passion. They want to poison us. They want to bomb us. They are, in effect, a terrorist organisation, right? People keep talking about the jihadists, right? You want to go and have a look at the Jesuits and see what they think about us, right? Again, with the Jews, you've got the Talmud. No one ever talks about the Talmud. It's worse than Sharia, right? It's only when you start reading it all and then you look at it logically and say, this is wrong, right? Well, England banished all of these people that were harming us. And when you look through the old law books, they show you, this is why I say the Constitution is the solution. It's happened before. You just show people, how did we deal with that before? This is how we dealt with it. And you go, right, there's position. The only person who is appearing to have the bottle to start to say it and do it is Rupert Lowe.
So I'm interested in the whole Jew theory or conspiracy, because a lot of people, where I get a lot of people critical of Islam on here, the amount of times I hear, Liam, you never get anybody that's critical of the Jews on here. It's like, well, I haven't found one yet that I would consider credible to come on, who's left the religion, like no whistleblower types. But what's your theory on the Jews? What are they responsible for, and what section of the Jews? Because obviously...
Now, that's a fantastic question. What you've just said there, what section of the Jews? People don't realise, the same as Christianity, even the same in Islam, there's different sects. And when I say sects, I mean sects, right? So getting back to the Jews, right?
This is interesting for me.
Well, again, so I want to make sure I emphasise this. We've got lots of Jewish members, right? And they love England. There's a Jew like me and you, and then you've got another group of people, which are the Talmud. And what I say about the Talmud, imagine the Talmud as a coin, and you flip it. On one side, you've got Zionist, and on the other side, you've got Bolshevik. The Bolsheviks killed 70 million Christians in the USSR, right? They was largely Jewish managed. Right, so for anyone and by the way, Stalin was educated by the Jesuits. So if anyone thinks this is all like make believe, it isn't. You need to really understand how it all fit together, and then different groups of people try and steer you away.
And you said all this is provable as well, isn't it?
Massively. I mean, it's difficult in an hour to try and explain these subjects.
But we're going to go on a bit longer because this is of great interest to me.
Right, so getting back to the Jews, most people don't realise there are different sects of Jews, right? So, and I'll give you the most important and dangerous people that have ever existed on this planet, certainly aligned with the Jesuits, and they are called the Sabbatines. So you had a guy called Sabbatine Levy who was a Jew, and they believed as a sect, by the way, he's the Jewish Messiah in 1666, right? The Jewish Messiah. So think of Jesus Christ of the Christians and then Sabbatine Levy. What they believed as a sect is that you transcended or ascended to heaven through sin. Not for not being a sinner, but for being a sinner, right? So without being too crude, they was into raping their own children as a sin. This is common. Orgies with and sleeping with each other's wives, certainly murder and sacrifice and all of the things that is forbidden in normal, everyday, if you want to call it Judaism, right? So the Sabbatine levy, a situation happened where, so let me just make sure everyone's aware of this. In 1666, he had over 1 million Jews following him passionately as the Messiah, right? He then gets called in to a sultan of the Ottoman Empire. And the sultan says to him, I'm obviously paraphrasing this conversation.
Of course.
I understand you say you're the Messiah and that you've got more power than me. And Sabbatine says, well, I am the Jewish Messiah, yeah. He said, good, I'm going to cut your head off, right? And literally, they was about to behead him. And he said, Sabbatine Levy said, let's have a deal, right? I will publicly convert to Islam if you spare me, because none of us win by that, right? And then I'll get all my followers, Jewish followers, to convert to Islam, right? They're called crypto Jews. They're pretend. They're not real Jews. But they're not real Islamic. And they converted to Islam, right? So this actually happened. This is not some fantasy. This is recorded in history as happening. And then 100 years later, we're spinning right the way forward. These people are highly dangerous, right? So this sect of Judaism has infiltrated Islam, right? 100 years later, another guy comes out called Jacob Frank, right? He believes, he's Jewish, he believes he is a reincarnation of Sabbatine Levy, right? People are all following him all over Europe, right? By the way, people go into the New Americas, Colombia and all them different, they was all banned from getting on the ships because of this group of people. You had to prove that you was a real Catholic, because what they did, they got thrown out of the Jewish religion and they converted to being Catholics, right? And then there was another group of people after Jacob Franks. Now, the Rothschilds were Sabbatines. In other words, they're not what I'd describe as real Jews, right? This is all in history. People can go and research it, right? There's fantastic videos about it, tell you the real history. So then people have infiltrated the different groups, and they're not who they say they are. They're crypto Jews, right? So when you took, like I say, it was a fantastic question because people think the Jew is a Jew. Well, I've got friends who are Jews, and they think just like me, right? They're married, they're wonderful people, etc. I know Muslims, right? I'd still call them Mohammedans, right? And I do, and they go, yeah, like we follow Muhammad. But I've sat there and talked to them and said, so when Sabbatine Levy converted to Islam, and they're going, yeah, he did. And then they become crypto Islam. So the whole stuff, it starts getting corrupted.
Very complicated, isn't it?
The same exists within Christianity.
I'll tell you my dilemma. I went to Israel because I wanted to see what was going on, and I wanted to get into Palestine just after Donald Trump had called for a ceasefire. But then as we arrived, Hamas started killing people in the streets again. And so I got 800 metres from Palestine, and they said there's no way you're going through there. You'll never come out alive. But because I went on that tour just to investigate, I want to, because everyone's been talking about that conflict in the UK. The streets have been dominated by it. So I thought, well, I've got an opportunity to go there and have a look and have a listen. So I done that. And because I went there, you got all these fucking maniacs on X. You're funded by the Jews, you're this, you're that. It's like, fuck me, if you can get that wrong. It's like, the Jews ain't concerned about me. But then, so I'll just land this. So all this Jew hatred and anti-Semitism that's sky high at the moment, and people even accusing you of being whatever because you're not lambasting them yourself. I've only ever met decent Jewish people. I only know Jewish decent people. So it's always been a conundrum. Why so much hatred? So asking you that question and your explanation, that kind of makes sense now. So there's a Jewish elite that you would say are evil.
I wouldn't say they're elite. I would say, so I have, again, when people ask me, are these people elite who are ruling us? I always say, no, they're not. What they are, there is something called dark personality. And to be part of dark personality, you have to be a narcissist, a psychopath, a Machiavellian, or a sadist, right? They have all got the same traits mentally, right? And the reason I know this is because I happened a few years ago to be in a relationship with a narcissistic woman, right? One of my mates joked and said, all women are narcissistic. I said, listen, when you meet a full Comanche narcissist, they are mentally ill, right? And they are evil with their everything that they do, right? They are not nice people. That group of people is called dark personality.
Was she covert or grandiose, out of interest?
She was covert. Even more difficult to pick up on.
The most lethal kind.
No, absolutely, right? So, again, I'm one of them people, if I see a problem, I think, that don't seem right, then start researching. Then I found a thesis in Australia, 562 pages of a doctor who explained the whole thing, and I was like, wow.
That's her.
Yeah, but once I'd seen it, I then started to spot other people that I knew that were in that dark personality range. It's easy to spot them. Anyway.
Just so you know, I get that completely. I mean, you know, obviously the story with me and my dad, and he's got a narcissistic personality disorder. That's how I learnt narcissism.
Yeah.
And then once you see it, you then see it on other people, and you can spot them out. So there's no one putting the wool over my eyes.
There's red flags, right? And once you understand, by the way, 90% of the population are not dark personality.
No.
But dark personality elevate into positions of power, whether it be a judge, whether it be a barrister, whether it be a solicitor, social services, your dad. And if you ever get kids in narcissistic when they're parented by narcissists, they'll single a kid out for the rest of the family to always have a little dig at. There's little things, there's triggers that you can watch for, and then you'd say that parent is narcissistic, and you can start to see it. There are other elements to it. Like I say, it's a 562-page thesis, but it is perfect. Tells you, and then once it happens, you think, now I understand it.
Yeah, you can't unsee that.
No, you can't unsee it. So what was the... What
we were talking about the different sects of Jews.
So getting back, and I do think...
There was a coin. You had Zionist one.
So if you had a Talmudic coin, and you flipped it, one side is Zionism, and the other side is Bolshevik.
And the Jewish elite we was talking about, what do you think they're responsible for?
So if...
Mass migration, for example, the Jews are getting blamed for that.
And in a lot of cases, they're involved with it.
Right,
without any doubts, but so are the Jesuits. So what I'm saying is, if you're going to blame anyone, at least be fair and talk about everyone, right, including the Fabian Society, which there's a lot of Jews involved with the Fabian Society, who are committed Marxists, right? And they're not allowed to be in positions of authority. The law books tell you that. Halsby's Laws of England, paragraph 1310, volume 8, right, tells you you're not allowed to have fascists or communists in the civil service. It is outlawed, right? So why are the Fabian Society running the country, right? And they're involved with everything, right? They're not a minor group. Sadiq Khan is the executive member. Keir Starmer, executive member, right? Last time that happened, when we had Fabians completely running the country, we went to war on a lie with Iraq. Right, because the whole cabinet, bar one, Claire Short, were Fabians. So they're a different group. But getting back to who these people are and what they are, so understand with the Jews, it's the same. If you've got a Jewish mafia, which there is, 100%, people need to be honest. Right, there is a Jewish mafia. They are extremely powerful, but that doesn't mean that every Jew is part of that mafia. You get normal Jews that just want to go to work every day. They're lovely people, etc. Right? The problem is these people who are operating in the background are at such a level they don't care about ordinary Jews. Right? It's the same as the King of England. Don't really give a shit about you. Right? Don't give a shit about me. He's at such a level. Why should he be bothered about us?
But do ordinary Jews, or do a percentage of ordinary Jews know about the sinister Jews?
Yeah,
or are they
but
oblivious?
Only in the same way as we do. But you couldn't start to express that. So getting back to Israel, right? I I'm again, people won't like this, but I'll tell you straight, right? Israel is an ethno-national state, right? There's another ethno-national state that I know of. There's probably more. Liberia, right, in Africa is an ethno-national state, right? Their constitution, don't forget I'm a constitutionalist, so I read different people's constitutions, right? Very sad, but but when you read through it, in Liberia, it says you cannot be a Liberian citizen unless you are a Negro. Where does it say that in the English constitution? It doesn't, right? That's my argument with ethno-nationalists here, right? I say to them, if you applied the English constitution, 98% of your problems would be solved because these people wouldn't be in positions of power. That's what you're arguing about, really and truthfully, right? And most of them would leave on their own accord, right? Because you have to restrict certain things. We've done that in our history before. There's nothing wrong with that. We're not saying put them against a wall and shoot them. We're just saying if you make it, listen, you're not abiding by our rules. This is the law. You need to leave, right? So getting back to Israel, the British Parliament was created by the Acts of Union. Prior to the Acts of Union, as a distinct feature of England and Scotland, prior to it being enacted by Parliament and creating a single Parliament called the British Parliament, right, we had a brotherhood of nations. It was a common law union. It wasn't a statutory union. It's really important people get that, right? So one of the things that Parliament did, it was infiltrated, right? The reason why they did that, and I believe it was the Jesuits, not the Jews, right, is because they needed to remove the English Bill of Rights and the protections that the English had, right, that we'd also afforded to the Scots with the claim of right in 1689. So when you start to get into the history and then read from the archives what our ancestors actually said, not what some idiot in a university is telling you, right, it tells you the truth. So part of this is that the British Parliament, there's no such thing as British law. There's English law and Scottish law. There's separate jurisdictions. The law books tell you that, right? But what's really important is what group of people would be so anti-England that they would want to destroy us, that they want to destroy England by regionalising us and imposing something called administrative law, right, which is what's happening with the regionalisation of England, right? 9 regions. London's already lost. Scotland's already lost as one of the 12 regions, by the way, right? So England gets divided into 9 regions. This has all been a plan. You can go and read about it.
That's not the Kalergi plan, is it?
No, I'm talking about the 5 presidents plan.
Okay.
Right, from the European Union, which has been in place for the best part of 40 years, right? Amount of people that complain about the EU and wanted to leave the EU, and they've never read it. If you read it, you wouldn't want anything to do with the EU, right? So by that regionalised, so getting to the point of this, who are the group of people that do not want England to become independent? In fact, they would have interfered with the Scottish referendum as well, right? They would interfere with any independence which disrupted the statutory union, right, which give the British Parliament, the British flag sits on top of that British Parliament, not the rest of the country, right? Who has that vested interest to make sure that England never rises? And the answer is Israel. Why?
That was my next question.
Well, because the Balfour Agreement was put in place by the British, right, and the British Parliament. The Palestinian Mandate in 1923 was put in place by the British Parliament, right? The partition of 1948, right, of the Levant being petitioned was put in place by the British Parliament, in effect, right? So you've got them 3 things. What happens if the British Parliament is abolished, made void, negative, never existed, like that? Israel doesn't exist anymore in law, right? So who are the